Guys, and welcome to Learning for Legends. Now then, if you are studying Arthur Miller's The Crucible and you're just about to begin this journey, you are in exactly the right spot. I'm really pleased that you're with me, and I'm only going to keep you a few minutes, and I'm hoping that it'll be the most important time that you will have while studying the Crucible. The context of this play is absolutely vital. I think that the context of books and plays and poems is really important in many cases. But I don't think I can think of, in all the time I've been teaching and the time I was studying English literature, I can think of where the context was more important than any other than in this play, The Crucible. And so that's very significant. Okay, so let's have a look at the context. I've got a few notes here, jot those down, and I think that by the time we're done here, you'll have a much better understanding whether you're going to have to write essays on the Crucible, whether it's something that's just for classwork, or perhaps you're going to be starring and you've got one of the main parts in a school production. I think your understanding of what is going on within this play is going to be really helpful all round. Okay, so firstly, the time is really important, and the play is set a really long time ago. It's the late 17th century, in 1692-93, and I think that if we look back at World War I and we see these black and white pictures and these sort of kind of really average filming performances, and World War II, that looks like a really long time ago. But 1692, I mean, that is, you know, it's almost difficult to comprehend how long ago that was. And so really important, because it allows you to be a bit more patient as you read through the play, that you understand that things were so different, so massively different. The most important difference that I think relating to the play is that everybody was really religious, massively religious. That was one of the big, the big deals. Everybody at that time in New England went to church. They came over from Great Britain and Europe, and they settled down that northeast coast of the States. And Salem is a town north of Massachusetts where the story is set. And one of the first things they would have put in that town was a church, and everybody worshipped and was very religious. And so that's something that's massively important, because if everybody was really religious, then everybody believed in God, and therefore everyone had to believe in the opposite. So they had to believe in the devil and Lucifer. And therefore, they all believed in witches, all right? And this is educated people, throughout the world. It wasn't just a bunch of strange, unusual people that thought that witches were cruising around on broomsticks. Everybody felt this way because of how powerful, not everybody, because I'm sure there were some conspirators, but ultimately, the majority of people believed very much in God. They were very religious, and therefore in the devil, and therefore witches who would go through rituals of certain sorts and go through strange processes in order to try and get what they wanted, to try and influence certain people. And it was very bad news. And if you were a witch, that was very bad news. And witches are sort of mentioned right from the outset in the play, and you just think, that's just too random, that's too weird. The only time really we think of witches is Halloween, when somebody's got a really cool costume for a party, and we go, yeah, look at that, there's a great witch over there, whatever. But everyone believed in witches in those days. So when you see that at the beginning of the story, don't write it off and go, wow, that's odd, that's weird. That is kind of what was happening at the time, and it's because religion was so important, and Salem was full of Puritans, and Puritans were even more. They were trying to purify the Protestant religion from the Roman Catholics, so they were even more kind of aggressive, and intense about their beliefs, and so the backdrop of the story is in this, you know, small town, settlers that, you know, from the States, and a new village, and they were all Puritans, unbelievably religious, and so that's vital. Okay, now then, at that time, and Arthur Miller did his research here. He apparently read a book at college when he was at university, and it was 1,000 pages long, all about witches. And he knew at that point that he was eventually going to write a story that involved this. And the story of the Crucible is based around these Salem witch trials in 1692 and 93, where a whole bunch of young girls were accused of being witches and then trialed, and many of them hanged and died. And it was, it was kind of wiped out of the history for a bit, then brought back and was seen again, and really bad news and really extraordinary. And it was all based on people accusing other people of being witches and in league with Lucifer and the devil. Okay, so these witch trials, which happened in the series of court cases that happened in 1692 and 93. Okay, so that is again, very significant to understand that these court hearings were going on at the time, and that is the backdrop of the time setting for the play. Now, the time when Miller wrote the play in the early 50s is also really important. Okay, so Arthur Miller says that he took about a year to write the play. It was published in 53, and so he wrote this in 52, 53. He says that the research that he had to do for this was really significant. In actual fact, one of the things that's not that frequently talked about is the language. He had to really take great pains to learn how they spoke in those days, and he talks about that. I'll talk to you about that in a little bit, but and to understand how they spoke in those days, and so he took a long time to write this play. But the important thing is that this was during the early 50s, and if we can think about that time in history, that is just after World War II, where initially we were allies. I say we, Great Britain and the USA were allies with Russia, and Russia was a communist country, and the colour for communism is seen as red, and ultimately America at this time, after World War II, was really worried about the growth of communism. It was against everything that America believes in and the freedom of their values and their culture, and so communism was, is the absolute opposite end of why America was built. So that was a big worry, that communism was building. China had just become communist, and in fact the Americans were very worried about it spreading through Europe, as the Italians were seen to become very communist as well. That was really significant, and so the Americans were very worried about this. And I've put down something which is worth researching, which is McCarthyism. Now, there was a guy called Senator Joe McCarthy, and he was very nervous about this communism that was spreading, and he started looking into and was very worried about the infiltration of communists into American culture. So started accusing certain people in politics, particularly in the arts, that they were accusing them that they were giving communist kind of ideals towards the American public. And so he started this sort of whole idea that communists were coming into America, and therefore many of them were getting into trouble and being imprisoned, etc. Okay? And this was all called the Big Red Scare, all right? So the reason that Arthur Miller wrote this play was that he felt this was a really unfortunate, very bad time, where a lot of people were being accused of being communists when they weren't, and that this was getting all very, very serious. And he wrote it as a protest, so it's kind of an example of protest literature. And he kind of decided that he would, as a result of his time back at college and that 1,000-page book that he read, that he thought that similarities to the Salem witch trials and the idea of this witch hunt, where people were being accused of things that were bad, was too similar. So ultimately, the Crucible is an allegory, and you'll have heard of that word before. All right, it's kind of an extended metaphor. It's a metaphor for something that's happened in history, and most significantly, I suppose, when we're talking about communism and whatnot. If you've read Animal Farm, that's a really good allegory for the Russian Revolution and how that evolved, and communism. So kind of the same sort of thing. So the Salem witch trials, which happened in the 17th century, all right, were Arthur Miller felt that they kind of mirrored what was happening with this big scare of communism coming into American culture, and he was very worried about that. And so therefore the Crucible kind of relates to something in modern history, and that idea and seeing how the characters behave and their interaction and the nature of their unpleasantness towards each other and the gossip. It's kind of a horrendous sort of story about gossip, really, and it's very important. I just want to finish on this. It's very important that when you're reading through and you see that somebody is accusing somebody else of witchcraft, that if they admitted that they were involved with witchcraft, then they would save themselves from being killed. All right? And that was a really weird, ironic sort of situation where people started to get out of their own guilt, would start accusing other people of witchcraft, and that was something that then allowed them to get away from being hanged. And I think that's a really important part of the play that confused me the first time I read it. That why are these people, just because they've admitted that that they've been in league with Lucifer, in league with the devil, that they've sort of got away with it, and why is that okay? So it's a really unusual one. Just want to finish by saying it's a really good idea to do as much research as you can. Have a look, and there's stacks of resources online about the context of the Crucible. There's stacks of resources on, studying the Crucible, going from scene 1 right the way through. But to have an idea of what's happening, have a look at the Salem witch trials, have a look at McCarthyism, see who this guy is and what was going on, get some more knowledge about that, the big Red Scare. If you're not quite sure about communism and what that is, have a look up and find that out, and how people live under communism. But one thing I would really suggest, and it's a little bit, it's quite intense and there's some quite tricky vocabulary there, but I would really suggest having a look at why Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible in the New Yorker, an article that's on Google. So have a look at that and read through, because it's absolutely brilliant and explains so much about why Arthur Miller wrote the story, and a little bit of his background, some of the things that I've mentioned there today. Even to the point of the context where he identifies with his personal relationship in his marriage with one of the main characters, and how significant that is, and why he therefore wrote it. So I hope that's going to be helpful. I want you to go out, and I just know that if you do a bit of research on these things, you're kind of going to be, especially this last one, this article is brilliant. I think that you will be into it. You'll get into it before you've even begun, and then the whole hope is that the story becomes a great deal more enjoyable for you. And if that means that you then perform better in exams, that's really good news. If it means that you perform better on the stage, that's great news too. Okay, lovely to spend nearly 15 minutes. Golly, I didn't really mean to go on that long with such a small amount of info, but it is the amount that you can go off and find out is extensive. So I hope 15 minutes wasn't too much of a sacrifice. And good luck with all of it, because it is a challenging one, but there's plenty in there, and it's pretty juicy at times. And once you understand all of this, quite interesting, amusing at certain points, and pretty scary as to what how gossip can really destroy a society. So all the best with that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'd love it obviously if you subscribe to Learning for Legends. That would be great, and I'm going to try and do some more videos that hopefully will help you with your literature. For the time being, take care. Bye bye.